What if I told you that a man who never studied medicine successfully diagnosed over 9,000 people while completely unconscious? What if this same man predicted the stock market crash of 1929, the beginning and end of both world wars, and earth changes that are happening right now in America? Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, left us over 14,000 documented psychic readings that continue to unfold with terrifying accuracy. Today I'm going to reveal 3 specific prophecies from his readings that point to a major transformation coming to America. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why even skeptics are paying attention to what Cayce saw in our future. Before we dive into these shocking predictions, I want you to think about this. Have you ever had a dream that felt more real than reality itself? Have you ever known something was going to happen before it actually did? Keep that feeling in mind, because what you're about to discover about Edgar Cayce will completely change how you understand consciousness and the hidden forces shaping our world. Edgar Cayce wasn't your typical psychic. Born in rural Kentucky in 1877, he discovered his extraordinary gift by accident when he lost his voice as a young man. Under hypnosis, he not only cured his own condition, but began accessing what he called the Akashic Records, a cosmic library containing the soul records of every person who has ever lived. But here's what will shock you about Cayce's method. Every single day for over 40 years, Cayce would lie down on a simple couch in his Virginia Beach office, loosen his tie, fold his hands over his stomach, and enter a trance so deep that doctors couldn't detect normal consciousness. His secretary, Gladys Davis, would sit beside him with her stenographer pad, recording every word that came through this sleeping man. What emerged from these sessions would revolutionize our understanding of healing, reincarnation, and humanity's spiritual destiny. But wait, there's something even more remarkable about these readings. Cayce himself had no memory of what he said during these trances. He was a devout Christian who sometimes felt conflicted about the information coming through him, especially when it contradicted traditional religious teachings. Yet the accuracy of his medical diagnoses was so extraordinary that doctors from around the world began consulting him for their most difficult cases. Let me share with you one documented case that will give you chills. In reading 54011, Cayce diagnosed a woman with a rare spinal condition that 3 different doctors had missed. He prescribed a specific combination of treatments, including osteopathic adjustments and a particular oil massage technique. The woman followed his recommendations exactly, and within 6 months, her condition completely disappeared. The attending physician was so amazed that he spent the rest of his career studying Cayce's medical readings. Here's what Cayce revealed in reading 25468 that changes everything about how we understand consciousness. He explained that every thought, every action, every experience of every soul is recorded in what he called the Akashic Records. Think of it as a cosmic internet where all information about past, present, and future exists simultaneously. When Cayce entered his trance state, he was accessing this universal database to provide healing information and glimpse future events. This brings us to the first major prophecy that's unfolding right now in America. In multiple readings given throughout the 1930s and 1940s, Cayce consistently warned about what he called the breaking up period that would begin in the late 20th century and intensify in the early 21st century. He specifically mentioned that this would be a time when old systems and structures would crumble to make way for a new spiritual consciousness. In reading 3976-15, given in 1934, Cayce stated that there would be the breaking up of conditions that have existed in the earth. He went on to describe upheavals in weather patterns, geological changes, and social structures that would force humanity to turn towards spiritual solutions. When you look at what's happening in America today, the extreme weather events, the social divisions, the questioning of traditional institutions, it's impossible to ignore the accuracy of these predictions. But here's the part that will really grab your attention. Cayce didn't just predict destruction, he revealed the deeper spiritual purpose behind these changes. In reading 1152:11, he explained that these upheavals are necessary to awaken humanity to its true spiritual nature. He said that souls have become too focused on material concerns and have forgotten their divine connection. The breaking up period serves as a wake-up call to return to spiritual values. Now, I promised you 3 specific prophecies, and the second one will shock you because it's happening right before our eyes. Cayce repeatedly spoke about what he called the awakening of the Kundalini in the American consciousness. For those unfamiliar, Kundalini is the spiritual energy that lies dormant at the base of the spine in Eastern traditions. But Cayce took this concept further, applying it to entire populations and nations. In reading 281-13, Cayce described how America would experience a mass spiritual awakening beginning in the late 20th century. He saw millions of Americans suddenly becoming interested in meditation, alternative healing, psychic phenomena, and ancient wisdom traditions. He predicted that yoga studios would become as common as churches, that meditation would be taught in schools, and that alternative medicine would gain mainstream acceptance. Think about this for a moment. When Cayce gave these readings in the 1940s, yoga was virtually unknown in America. Meditation was considered exotic, and alternative medicine was dismissed by the medical establishment. Yet today, over 36 million Americans practice yoga. Meditation is taught in major corporations and schools, and integrative medicine is offered in most major hospitals. The spiritual awakening Cayce predicted is happening exactly as he described. But wait, there's something even more specific about this awakening that Cayce revealed. In reading 1158-12, he explained that this spiritual renaissance would begin on the east coast of America and spread westward, following what he called energy lines across the continent. He mentioned Virginia Beach specifically as one of the primary centers for this awakening. Today, Virginia Beach is home to the Association for Research and Enlightenment, the organization founded to preserve and study Cayce's work, and it has indeed become a major center for spiritual seekers from around the world. Here's where it gets really interesting. Cayce didn't just predict that Americans would become more spiritual. He explained why this awakening was necessary for the survival of human civilization. In reading 3976-29, he stated that unless humanity develops its psychic and spiritual abilities, it would destroy itself through technological advancement without wisdom. He saw a future where spiritual development would become as important as scientific progress. This brings us to the third and most dramatic prophecy, one that even seasoned Cayce researchers approach with caution. Throughout his readings, Cayce consistently spoke about major earth changes that would reshape the geography of America and the world. These weren't just casual predictions, they were detailed, specific, and repeated across multiple readings spanning decades. In reading 3976-15, Cayce predicted that portions of the east coast of America would be broken up, that new land would appear in the Atlantic and Pacific, and that the Great Lakes would empty into the Gulf of Mexico. He saw Los Angeles and San Francisco being destroyed, and new land appearing off the coast of the southeastern United States. Most dramatically, he predicted that much of Japan would go into the sea, that northern Europe would be changed, and that there would be open waters appear in the northern portions of Greenland. Now, before you dismiss these predictions as too extreme, consider this. Cayce gave specific timeframes for some of these changes, stating they would begin to manifest around 1958 to 1998 and continue into the early decades of the 21st century. When we look at the dramatic increase in seismic activity, the unprecedented melting of polar ice, the rising sea levels, and the extreme weather patterns we're experiencing, many researchers believe these earth changes are already underway, just manifesting more gradually than originally interpreted. But here's what Cayce revealed that puts these earth changes in a completely different perspective. In reading 826-8, he explained that these geological shifts are not random natural disasters, but are actually the Earth's response to humanity's collective consciousness. He stated that the Earth is a living entity with its own spiritual purpose, and when human consciousness becomes too negative or destructive, the Earth responds by purifying itself through natural catastrophes. This concept might sound far-fetched, but modern science is beginning to recognize what indigenous cultures have always known, that human consciousness and the Earth's electromagnetic field are intimately connected. Research at the HeartMath Institute has shown that collective human emotions can actually affect the Earth's magnetic field. When Cayce spoke about the connection between consciousness and earth changes over 80 years ago, he was describing principles that quantum physics is only now beginning to understand. Here's something that will give you hope about these predictions. Cayce consistently taught that these earth changes were not inevitable. They were probable outcomes based on humanity's collective choices. In Reading 416.7, he stated that through prayer, meditation, and raising consciousness, humans could minimize the severity of these changes. He saw groups of spiritually minded people around the world serving as lightning rods to help stabilize the Earth's energy during turbulent times. This is why Cayce's work remains so relevant today. He wasn't just predicting disaster. He was providing a roadmap for spiritual transformation that could help humanity navigate these challenging times. In Reading 262.52, he outlined specific techniques for developing psychic abilities, healing others, and connecting with higher consciousness. These weren't theoretical concepts, but practical instructions based on universal spiritual laws. Let me share with you one of the most profound healing cases from Cayce's files that demonstrates the power of consciousness to create miraculous changes. A young woman came to Cayce with advanced tuberculosis that doctors said was incurable. In Reading 4021.1, Cayce prescribed a combination of specific dietary changes, a particular breathing exercise, and most importantly, a daily meditation practice where she would visualize golden light filling her lungs. The woman followed Cayce's recommendations religiously. Within 6 months, her tuberculosis had completely disappeared, leaving her doctors baffled. But here's the remarkable part. X-rays showed that her lungs were not only healed, but actually stronger than before the illness. This case, documented in the ARE archives, demonstrates what Cayce taught about the mind's ability to heal the body when properly directed. Now you might be wondering how all of this applies to your own life and spiritual development. Cayce's readings contain specific guidance for navigating the current period of transformation. In Reading 5749.2, he outlined what he called the prerequisites for spiritual development. These include daily meditation, service to others, studying spiritual truths, and maintaining a positive mental attitude regardless of external circumstances. But here's something Cayce revealed that most people don't realize about spiritual development. In Reading 281.4, he explained that every soul chooses to incarnate during this particular time period because it offers unprecedented opportunities for spiritual growth. He stated that the challenges we're facing as a society are actually catalysts for rapid spiritual evolution, allowing souls to advance in one lifetime what might normally take several incarnations. This brings us to one of Cayce's most encouraging prophecies about America's spiritual destiny. In Reading 3976.19, he saw America playing a crucial role in ushering in what he called the new age of spiritual consciousness. He predicted that America would become a beacon of light for the world, demonstrating how material progress and spiritual development can work together harmoniously. Cayce described this new consciousness as one where psychic abilities would be as natural as physical senses, where healing would combine medical science with spiritual energy, and where people would understand their connection to the universal consciousness. He saw educational systems teaching meditation alongside mathematics, hospitals using prayer alongside surgery, and governments making decisions based on spiritual principles as well as practical considerations. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Cayce's prophecies is how they provide hope during what appears to be a time of crisis. In Reading 1602.3, he explained that what looks like destruction is actually reconstruction, what appears to be ending is actually beginning. He taught that humanity is not approaching the end of the world, but the end of one phase of consciousness and the beginning of another. For those of you who feel called to participate in this spiritual transformation, Cayce provided specific guidance in Reading 254.87. He recommended finding others who share your spiritual interests, forming study groups to explore these deeper truths, and, most importantly, putting these principles into practice in your daily life. He emphasized that spiritual knowledge without application is worthless, but when lived authentically, it becomes a powerful force for positive change. The evidence for Cayce's prophetic accuracy continues to mount with each passing year. His prediction of Israel becoming a nation again made decades before it happened. His description of the Dead Sea Scrolls being discovered, given years before their actual finding. His warnings about the stock market crashes of 1929 and the subsequent Great Depression, provided when the economy appeared strong. But beyond the prophecies, Cayce's greatest gift to humanity may be his teachings about the nature of consciousness itself. In reading 37444, he revealed that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but exists independently and uses the brain as an instrument. This understanding, now being explored by cutting-edge neuroscientists, explains how Cayce could access information while unconscious and how all of us have latent psychic abilities waiting to be developed. As we face the challenges ahead, whether they be earth changes, social upheavals, or personal transformations, Cayce's readings provide both warning and guidance. They remind us that we are not victims of circumstances, but co-creators of reality, capable of influencing outcomes through our thoughts, prayers, and actions. The sleeping prophet's message is ultimately one of hope and empowerment. Yes, major changes are coming to America and the world, but these changes are part of a larger spiritual awakening that will ultimately benefit all of humanity. By understanding these prophetic warnings and applying Cayce's spiritual teachings, we can not only survive the transformation ahead, but thrive as we step into a new era of human consciousness. The question now is not whether these changes will occur, but how prepared you are to navigate them with wisdom, compassion, and spiritual strength. Edgar Cayce left us a roadmap. Now it's up to each of us to follow it. What if I told you that America's most documented psychic Edgar Cayce gave a final warning before his death in 1945 that could change everything you think you know about consciousness, healing, and the future of humanity? What if this warning, buried in over 14,000 documented readings, contains the key to understanding why our world seems to be falling apart spiritually? I'm about to reveal the shocking truth about Cayce's final prophecies that even his closest followers struggled to accept. By the end of this video, you'll understand why his last readings were so disturbing that some people wished he had never given them at all. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like humanity is sleepwalking toward some kind of spiritual catastrophe? Like we're ignoring signs that are right in front of us? Well, you're not alone, and Edgar Cayce saw this coming decades ago. Here's what we're going to uncover together. First, the terrifying accuracy of Cayce's final prophecies about America's spiritual decline. Second, his documented warnings about what he called the Great Awakening that most people would miss. And third, the specific steps he gave in his readings for those who would listen to prepare for what's coming. Edgar Cayce wasn't just any psychic. This man from Hopkinsville, Kentucky, could enter a trance state and access what he called the Akashic Records, the cosmic library of all human experience. For over 40 years, his secretary Gladys Davis transcribed every single word he spoke while unconscious. 14,000 documented readings. No other psychic in history comes close to this level of verification. But wait, there's something most people don't know about Cayce's final years. As World War II was ending, his readings began taking on a different tone. Gone were the hopeful healing remedies and gentle life guidance. Instead, Cayce began speaking about something he called the Great Purification that would test humanity's soul. In reading 397615, given in 1944, Cayce warned that America would face a spiritual crisis that would make the Great Depression look like a minor inconvenience. He said the real test wasn't going to be economic or political, but whether Americans could remember their connection to the divine source of all healing and wisdom. Think about that for a moment. This was a man who had spent decades helping thousands of people heal from impossible conditions through his psychic readings. Suddenly, he's talking about a spiritual emergency that would require something far beyond physical healing. Here's what Cayce revealed in reading 25468 that shocked even his stenographer. He said that by the early 21st century, humanity would develop incredible technological powers, but would simultaneously lose touch with the spiritual laws that govern true healing and consciousness. People would have access to more information than ever before, yet would be more confused about their life purpose than any generation in history. Does this sound familiar? We're living in exactly the time period Cayce was describing. We have smartphones that can access all human knowledge instantly, yet depression and anxiety rates are through the roof. We have medical technology that can perform miracles, yet people are sicker and more spiritually lost than ever. But here's where it gets really interesting. Cayce didn't just predict this spiritual crisis, he gave specific instructions for how to navigate it. In 3 minutes, I'm going to show you the reading that made Cayce's own family members question whether they wanted him to continue his psychic work. But first, let me tell you about Amy Kellerman from Virginia Beach. Amy was one of the last people to receive a life reading from Edgar Cayce before his death. She was a 28-year-old teacher who felt completely lost in life, despite having everything she thought she wanted. Her reading, number 2067-1, contained what many consider to be Cayce's clearest explanation of the spiritual awakening process. Cayce told Amy that she was living through what he called a soul initiation. He explained that certain souls had chosen to incarnate during this specific time period to help humanity remember its divine nature. But here's the catch. These souls would first have to go through their own dark night of the soul. Amy's reading revealed that she had lived previous lives in ancient Egypt and Atlantis, where she had been a temple healer. Her current life confusion wasn't a problem to be solved, but a spiritual awakening to be understood. Cayce told her that the skills she had developed in those ancient lifetimes were trying to emerge, but modern society had no framework for understanding them. This is exactly what Cayce warned about in his final prophecies. He said that thousands of advanced souls would incarnate in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, but most of them would feel like strangers in their own world. They would have memories of spiritual abilities they couldn't explain, and a deep knowing that something was terribly wrong with how humanity was living. Amy followed Cayce's guidance and eventually became one of the founding members of the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. But her story illustrates something crucial about Cayce's final warning. Here's what changes everything about consciousness, according to Cayce's last readings. He said that the spiritual crisis humanity is facing isn't actually a crisis at all. It's a graduation exam. In reading 5749-14, Cayce explained that planet Earth is like a school for souls. Different time periods represent different grade levels. He said that we're currently transitioning from 3rd grade to 4th grade consciousness, and like any major transition, it's causing chaos for those who aren't prepared. But wait, what exactly did Cayce mean by 4th grade consciousness? This is where his teachings get really profound. According to the readings, 3rd grade consciousness is characterized by separation thinking. People see themselves as isolated individuals competing for limited resources. They believe in either-or thinking, good versus evil, us versus them. This is the consciousness that has dominated human civilization for thousands of years. 4th grade consciousness, on the other hand, is based on unity thinking. People begin to understand that all consciousness is connected, that what affects one person affects everyone. They start to access what Cayce called the Christ consciousness, not as a religious concept, but as a level of spiritual development available to all human beings. Here's the shocking part. Cayce said that this transition was not optional. Every soul on Earth during this time period would have to choose between 3rd grade and 4th grade consciousness. Those who refused to evolve would find themselves increasingly unhappy and confused, while those who embraced the transition would discover abilities they never knew they had. Remember how I mentioned that reading which disturbed Cayce's own family? Here it is. In one of his final trance sessions, reading 5748-6, Cayce was asked about the future of psychic phenomena. His answer was so unsettling that his wife Gertrude asked him never to address the topic again while in trance. Cayce said that by the early 2000s, psychic abilities would become so common that they would no longer be considered special. Children would be born remembering their past lives clearly. Adults would begin having prophetic dreams and visions on a regular basis. People would start reading each other's thoughts and emotions without even trying. But here's why this terrified his family. Cayce explained that most people would be so frightened by these emerging abilities that they would desperately try to shut them down. They would turn to drugs, alcohol, entertainment, and other distractions to avoid facing the reality that consciousness was expanding whether they wanted it to or not. He said that this would create two distinct groups of people. Those who embraced their expanding consciousness would experience unprecedented levels of health, creativity, and spiritual fulfillment. Those who fought against it would experience increasing levels of mental illness, addiction, and what he called soul sickness. Does this description match what you're seeing in the world today? We have more people than ever reporting psychic experiences, yet also more people than ever struggling with depression and anxiety. We have access to more spiritual information than any generation in history, yet also more confusion about what's actually true. This is exactly what Cayce predicted would happen during the Great Purification. But here's what most people missed about Cayce's final warning. He wasn't trying to scare anyone. He was trying to prepare them. In reading Tucson 6289, Cayce gave specific instructions for navigating this transition. He said that the most important thing was to maintain what he called spiritual equilibrium. This meant staying grounded in daily spiritual practices while remaining open to new levels of consciousness. Let me share with you the story of Robert Johnson, a businessman from Norfolk who received one of Cayce's last health readings. Robert was suffering from what doctors called nervous exhaustion, but Cayce's reading revealed something much more interesting. Cayce told Robert that his physical symptoms were actually the result of his soul trying to adjust to higher frequencies of spiritual energy. He explained that as consciousness evolves, the physical body has to learn to handle more refined energetic vibrations. People who resist this process often develop mysterious illnesses that conventional medicine can't treat effectively. The solution wasn't medication or therapy. Cayce prescribed a combination of meditation, specific dietary changes, and what he called spiritual service. He told Robert to find ways to help other people awaken to their spiritual nature, because teaching others would help stabilize his own energy system. Robert followed Cayce's guidance and not only recovered his health but discovered he had natural healing abilities. He spent the rest of his life working with people who were going through similar spiritual transitions. This brings us to the most important part of Cayce's final warning. He said that the people who would successfully navigate the Great Purification would be those who understood that spiritual evolution is a collaborative process, not an individual achievement. Here's what Cayce revealed about the Akashic records that explains everything. He said that the Akashic records aren't just a cosmic library of past events. They're actually a living system that connects all consciousness together. When one person evolves spiritually, it makes it easier for everyone else to evolve. This is why Cayce was so insistent that people share their spiritual discoveries with others. He understood that consciousness evolution spreads like ripples in a pond. The more people who wake up to their true spiritual nature, the easier it becomes for others to wake up as well. In reading 5756-12, Cayce gave what many consider to be his most important prophecy about America's spiritual future. He said that despite all the chaos and confusion, America would eventually become the birthplace of a new form of Christianity that combined the best of Eastern and Western spiritual traditions. He explained that this wouldn't happen through religious institutions, but through ordinary people who discovered their direct connection to divine consciousness. These people would demonstrate the reality of spiritual laws through their daily lives, healing others not through special techniques, but through the power of their awakened consciousness. But here's the catch. Cayce said this spiritual renaissance would only happen if enough people were willing to go through their own individual awakening process first. He warned that if too many people chose to remain in third-grade consciousness, the transition would be much more difficult and painful for everyone. This is why Cayce's final warning was so urgent. He could see both potential futures, one where humanity embraced its spiritual evolution gracefully, and another where the resistance to change created unnecessary suffering. Now, let me tell you about the specific steps Cayce gave for preparing for this transition. These instructions, scattered throughout his final readings, form what some researchers call the Cayce Protocol for Spiritual Awakening. First, Cayce emphasized the importance of daily meditation, but not just any meditation. He specifically recommended what he called attunement meditation, which involves consciously connecting with what he called the creative forces of the universe. This isn't about emptying the mind, but about filling it with divine consciousness. Second, he stressed the importance of studying spiritual principles, particularly the law of karma and reincarnation. Cayce said that understanding these laws would help people make sense of their life experiences and see the larger pattern of their soul's development. Third, he recommended what he called spiritual service. This means actively looking for ways to help other people grow spiritually, whether through healing, teaching, or simply being a positive example of awakened consciousness. Fourth, Cayce emphasized the importance of physical purification through proper diet, exercise, and what he called internal cleansing. He explained that spiritual evolution requires a clean physical vehicle to handle higher frequencies of consciousness. Finally, and this might be the most important, Cayce stressed the need for what he called group soul work. He said that the advanced souls incarnating during this time period were meant to find each other and work together as spiritual communities. Here's what's fascinating about this last point. Cayce predicted that traditional religious institutions would largely miss the Great Awakening because they would be too attached to old forms of spiritual practice. Instead, he said the real spiritual revolution would happen through informal networks of awakened individuals who recognized each other through what he called soul resonance. Does this sound like what's happening today? We have millions of people who consider themselves spiritual but not religious. We have countless online communities where people share their psychic experiences and spiritual discoveries. We have a growing movement of people who are combining ancient wisdom with modern science to understand consciousness. This is exactly what Cayce saw coming. But here's what most people are missing about this spiritual awakening. Cayce warned that it would be accompanied by what he called false prophets and spiritual materialism. He said that as people became more interested in consciousness expansion, there would be countless teachers and systems that promised quick spiritual advancement without the necessary inner work. In reading 57523, Cayce gave specific guidance for distinguishing between authentic spiritual teachers and those who were misleading people. He said that true spiritual teachers always emphasize service to others, never ask for personal worship or excessive money, and consistently demonstrate the fruits of spiritual development in their own lives. Most importantly, he said that authentic spiritual paths always lead to greater love, compassion, and wisdom, never to fear, separation, or spiritual pride. This guidance is especially relevant today when we have so many different spiritual teachers and systems available. Cayce's criteria provide a reliable way to evaluate which approaches are truly helpful for spiritual evolution. Now let me share with you one of the most remarkable documented cases from Cayce's final period. This is the story of Margaret Thompson, a nurse from Richmond who received reading 1968-2, just 3 months before Cayce's death. Margaret had been experiencing what she called waking visions since childhood, but had always dismissed them as imagination. During World War II, however, her visions became so accurate that she started paying attention. She could see wounded soldiers before they arrived at her hospital and often knew exactly what treatments they would need. When Margaret finally got a reading from Cayce, he explained that she was experiencing what he called the awakening of the Christ consciousness within her. He told her that her healing abilities were a natural result of her soul's development over many lifetimes, and that she had chosen to incarnate during this particular time period specifically to help with the transition of consciousness. But here's what makes Margaret's case so significant. Cayce told her that her experiences were just the beginning. He said that within a few decades, thousands of people would be having similar awakenings, and that it would be important for the early awakeners to document their experiences and help others understand what was happening. Margaret followed Cayce's guidance and spent the rest of her life working with what she called spiritual emergence cases. She helped hundreds of people understand that their unusual experiences weren't signs of mental illness, but evidence of consciousness expansion. Her detailed records, now housed in the ARE archives in Virginia Beach, provide some of the best documentation we have of how spiritual awakening actually unfolds in ordinary people's lives. This brings us to perhaps the most important aspect of Cayce's final warning. He said that the success of humanity's spiritual evolution would depend largely on how well the early awakeners supported each other and shared their experiences. He explained that consciousness evolution has always happened through what he called group soul initiations. Small groups of people awaken first, then their expanded consciousness creates a field that makes it easier for others to awaken. This process continues until a critical mass is reached, and the new level of consciousness becomes available to everyone. Cayce said that we're currently in the early stages of this process. The people who are having spontaneous spiritual experiences, unusual dreams, or feelings of cosmic consciousness are the advanced team for humanity's next evolutionary step. But here's the challenge. Many of these early awakeners feel isolated and confused because mainstream society doesn't have a framework for understanding their experiences. This is exactly what Cayce predicted would happen. In reading 5749-16, he gave specific guidance for how awakening souls could find each other and provide mutual support. He said to look for people who demonstrated what he called the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. He also said that awakening souls would recognize each other through what he called soul resonance. When two people who are spiritually evolving meet, they experience an immediate sense of recognition and understanding, even if they've never met before. This is why Cayce emphasized the importance of community so strongly in his final readings. He understood that spiritual evolution is ultimately a collective process, not an individual achievement. Now, here's what Cayce said about the timeline for this great awakening. In reading 1602-3, he predicted that the transition period would last approximately 30 years, beginning in the 1990s and culminating in the 2020s. He said that during this time, there would be increasing numbers of people experiencing spontaneous spiritual awakenings, but also increasing resistance from those who wanted to maintain the old consciousness. This would create what he called a polarization of consciousness, where people would be drawn to either love-based or fear-based ways of living. Does this description match what you're observing in the world today? We seem to be living through exactly the kind of consciousness polarization Cayce predicted. But here's the hopeful part of his prophecy. Cayce said that despite the apparent chaos, the outcome was ultimately positive. He explained that consciousness evolution is like childbirth, intense and sometimes painful, but leading to new life. He predicted that by the mid-2020s, enough people would have completed their individual awakening process that a new form of civilization would begin to emerge. This wouldn't happen through political or social revolution, but through the natural expression of evolved consciousness in daily life. People would begin living from what Cayce called the law of love rather than the law of fear. Communities would form around shared spiritual values rather than economic or political interests. Healing would become a natural part of daily life as people learn to work with spiritual energy. Most importantly, Cayce said that the artificial separation between science and spirituality would dissolve as researchers discovered the consciousness principles that govern all manifestation. This is already beginning to happen. We have quantum physicists talking about consciousness as a fundamental force in the universe. We have medical researchers studying the effects of prayer and meditation on healing. We have psychologists exploring the reality of past life memories and near-death experiences. All of this was predicted in Cayce's final readings. But here's what Cayce emphasized most strongly in his last prophecies. He said that the Great Awakening wouldn't happen automatically. It would require conscious participation from those who understood what was occurring. In reading 3976-29, his final discourse on world conditions, Cayce explained that humanity was at a crucial choice point. The tools for spiritual evolution were available, but people would have to choose to use them. He said that each person who committed to their own spiritual development was literally helping to birth a new world. But he also warned that those who chose to remain unconscious would find life increasingly difficult as the old consciousness patterns stopped working. This is why Cayce's final warning was so urgent. He could see that humanity was approaching what he called the point of no return. After a certain point, the momentum of consciousness evolution would become irreversible, and those who hadn't prepared would be left behind. But what did Cayce mean by being left behind? This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of his prophecies. Cayce didn't believe in punishment or damnation. He taught that every soul eventually evolves to higher consciousness, but not necessarily in the same lifetime or on the same planet. He said that souls who weren't ready for fourth-grade consciousness would simply continue their education elsewhere, in environments more suited to their current level of development. This is actually a very compassionate vision. Nobody is lost or condemned. Everyone continues to evolve at their own pace. But the Earth itself is graduating to a higher level of consciousness, and only souls who are ready for that level will be able to remain here. In his final personal reading, 294-212, Cayce addressed his own role in this great transition. He said that his 40 years of psychic readings had been preparation for what he called the real work, which was helping people understand the spiritual laws that govern consciousness evolution. He explained that the thousands of documented readings weren't just individual guidance sessions. They were actually a comprehensive textbook for spiritual development designed to help humanity navigate the transition to higher consciousness. This is why the ARE continues to study and preserve Cayce's readings. They represent one of the most complete maps we have for understanding how consciousness actually evolves. But here's what Cayce emphasized in that final reading. He said that the information was only valuable if people actually applied it in their daily lives. Intellectual understanding wasn't enough. The spiritual principles had to be lived and demonstrated. He also said that each person who successfully navigated their own awakening process would become a living example for others who were just beginning the journey. This is how consciousness evolution spreads, through demonstration rather than preaching. As we near the end of our time together, let me share with you the most practical guidance from Cayce's final warnings. First, trust your inner experiences. If you're having unusual dreams, spontaneous healing experiences, or moments of expanded consciousness, don't dismiss them as imagination. Document them and look for patterns. Second, find your spiritual community. Look for others who are going through similar experiences. Share your discoveries and learn from theirs. Remember, this is a collaborative process. Third, maintain your daily spiritual practices. Meditation, prayer, study, and service create the foundation for stable spiritual development. Without these anchors, consciousness expansion can become chaotic and frightening. Fourth, stay grounded in physical reality. Spiritual evolution isn't about escaping the world, but about bringing higher consciousness into everyday life. Take care of your body, maintain your relationships, and fulfill your practical responsibilities. Finally, remember that you chose to be here during this extraordinary time in human history. Your presence on Earth during the Great Awakening isn't an accident. You have a unique contribution to make to humanity's spiritual evolution. Cayce's final warning wasn't meant to frighten anyone. It was meant to prepare us for the most exciting adventure in human history, the conscious evolution of an entire species. The question isn't whether this awakening will happen. According to Cayce's readings, it's already underway and accelerating rapidly. The question is whether you'll consciously participate in it or try to resist it. The tools are available, the guidance is clear, the community is forming. The only thing missing is your decision to step fully into your spiritual potential. Edgar Cayce spent his entire life demonstrating that consciousness is far more powerful and flexible than most people realize. His final warning was simply this: the time for playing small is over. Humanity is ready for its next evolutionary leap, and that leap begins with individuals like you who are willing to awaken to their true spiritual nature. The sleeping prophet has given us the roadmap. Now it's up to us to walk the path. The future of human consciousness literally depends on the choices we make in the next few years. What will you choose? Will you be among those who help birth a new world? Or will you remain asleep while the greatest transformation in human history unfolds around you? The choice, as always, is yours. But remember, Edgar Cayce saw this moment coming, and he knew that souls like yours would be here to answer the call. The awakening has begun. Your time is now. What if the spiritual memories you're trying to unlock could actually destroy your present happiness? Edgar Cayce, America's most documented psychic, gave over 14,000 readings that revealed a shocking truth about past life recall that most spiritual seekers never hear about. In his reading 57532, Cayce warned that accessing certain past life memories without proper spiritual preparation could create what he called karmic confusion that would literally tear apart your current relationships, career, and mental stability. Today I'm going to share with you 3 documented cases from the Association for Research and Enlightenment Archives in Virginia Beach, where past life memories created devastating consequences, and more importantly, Cayce's specific guidance on how to avoid these spiritual traps. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever had vivid dreams about living in another time period, felt an unexplained connection to a historical era, or experienced instant recognition when meeting someone for the first time? Hold on to those thoughts, because what I'm about to reveal will change everything you think you know about reincarnation and memory. The Sleeping Prophet, as Cayce was known in his hometown of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, didn't just confirm that we live multiple lives. His readings revealed that our souls carry forward both the gifts and the burdens from every incarnation, and accessing these memories incorrectly could activate what he termed karmic debts that weren't meant to surface in this lifetime. But wait, here's where it gets really interesting. In reading 1620-01, Cayce described how a woman's attempts to recall her past as an Egyptian priestess actually triggered a series of events that led to her divorcing her husband, abandoning her children, and eventually suffering a complete psychological breakdown. The tragic part? Cayce revealed that she had specifically chosen this current incarnation to heal those ancient wounds through service and family love, not by reliving the glory of her temple days. This changes everything about how we should approach spiritual awakening, doesn't it? Let me share with you the story of Margaret, a schoolteacher from Richmond, Virginia, who contacted Cayce in 1928. Margaret had been experiencing what she called Egyptian dreams, where she saw herself as a powerful healer in ancient temples. These visions were so vivid that she began to feel her current life as a simple educator was beneath her spiritual station. Here's what Cayce revealed in her life reading that shocked even his longtime stenographer Gladys Davis. Margaret had indeed been an Egyptian healer, but she had abused her psychic gifts for personal gain and had caused tremendous suffering. Her current incarnation as a teacher was specifically designed to develop humility and genuine service. By trying to reclaim her ancient powers, she was actually preventing her soul's evolution. The reading stated that if Margaret continued to focus on her past Egyptian identity, she would repeat the same karmic mistakes, potentially setting her soul's progress back several lifetimes. Cayce warned that she needed to embrace her current role completely before any spiritual abilities could safely return. This case illustrates a crucial principle that Cayce emphasized throughout his work. Our current circumstances aren't random or beneath us. They're precisely designed by our higher selves to address specific karmic needs. When we reject our present situation in favor of glamorous past life identities, we're actually rejecting our soul's curriculum. But here's what most people don't understand about Cayce's teachings on past lives. The Sleeping Prophet consistently emphasized that memory without wisdom is dangerous. In reading 2067-1, he explained that the subconscious mind contains not just our personal past life experiences, but fragments of the collective unconscious that can create false memories and spiritual inflation. Now you might be wondering, how can we tell the difference between genuine past life insight and dangerous spiritual fantasy? Cayce provided specific guidelines that I'll share with you in just a moment, but first let me tell you about James, a businessman from Norfolk who nearly destroyed his marriage because of what he believed were Atlantean memories. James had been successful in real estate when he began having dreams about being a crystal technician in Atlantis. These visions were incredibly detailed, showing him operating sophisticated machinery and holding positions of great authority. Convinced these were genuine memories, James became obsessed with finding others from his supposed Atlantean group. He neglected his business, spent thousands of dollars traveling to meet people he believed were his ancient companions, and eventually his wife threatened divorce. When James finally sought a reading from Cayce in 1934, the revelation was startling. Cayce confirmed that James had indeed lived during the Atlantean period, but not as the important technician he imagined. He had been a simple laborer who had become fascinated with the crystal technology, but had never understood or operated it. His current dreams were mixing genuine soul memory with wishful thinking and what Cayce called astral impressions from other souls' experiences. More importantly, Cayce revealed that James's Atlantean incarnation had ended tragically because of his tendency to abandon practical responsibilities in pursuit of spiritual glamour. His current life was specifically designed to learn the value of steady commitment and earthly service. By chasing Atlantean fantasies, he was repeating the exact pattern that had led to his downfall 12,000 years ago. This brings us to one of Cayce's most important warnings about past life exploration. In reading 5246-1, he stated that souls often incarnate with specific spiritual amnesia about certain lifetimes because remembering too much too soon could overwhelm the personality and prevent necessary growth. Think about it this way. If you knew you had been Napoleon Bonaparte, would you be content learning patience as a middle manager in Milwaukee? If you remembered being Cleopatra, would you focus on developing humility as a suburban mother? Cayce taught that our current limitations often serve as protective boundaries, allowing us to develop qualities that our past life personalities lacked. But wait, there's something even more crucial that Cayce revealed about past life memories that could completely change your spiritual practice. In his reading for a woman identified as 53832, he explained that certain past life memories are actually tests. The soul presents us with these vivid recollections to see if we'll become attached to past glory or use the insights for present service. The woman in question had been receiving clear memories of her life as a Native American medicine woman. Instead of using this insight to develop her natural healing gifts in her current incarnation, she became obsessed with the romance and power of her shamanic identity. Cayce warned that this fixation was actually preventing her from accessing genuine healing abilities that were meant to emerge through humble, consistent practice in her present life. Here's the pattern that Cayce identified in dozens of similar cases. When we become attached to impressive past life identities, we often develop what he called spiritual pride that blocks our actual spiritual development. The ego loves to claim exotic and powerful past lives because it feeds our sense of specialness. But genuine spiritual growth usually requires us to fully embrace whatever ordinary circumstances we've been given in this incarnation. Now let me share with you Cayce's practical guidelines for safely approaching past life insights. First, he consistently taught that any genuine past life memory should make you more compassionate and effective in your current relationships and responsibilities, not less. If remembering a past incarnation causes you to reject your present circumstances or feel superior to others, Cayce would say that memory is either false or you're interpreting it incorrectly. Second, Cayce emphasized that past life information should come naturally through service and spiritual development, not through forced techniques or obsessive seeking. In reading 57531, he stated that souls reveal their past when the personality is ready to use that information constructively. Trying to force past life recall often opens us to what he called psychic confusion, where we mistake imagination, suggestion, or even spiritual interference for genuine soul memory. The Sleeping Prophet also warned about a specific danger that's incredibly relevant today. With so many books, workshops, and online resources promising easy access to past life memories, people often collect dramatic past life identities like spiritual trophies. Cayce observed that souls who had lived many incarnations could become confused about which lifetime's patterns and talents were meant to be active in the current incarnation. In reading 1968-2, Cayce described how a man's attempts to simultaneously channel abilities from his Egyptian, Atlantean, and medieval lifetimes created what could only be described as spiritual chaos. The man couldn't maintain relationships because he was trying to live as if he were simultaneously a priest, a knight, and a temple architect. His personality fragmented under the weight of conflicting past life identities. This reveals something crucial about Cayce's understanding of reincarnation. We don't just randomly cycle through different lifetimes. Each incarnation is carefully planned by our higher selves to address specific karmic needs and develop particular qualities. When we try to activate multiple past life personalities simultaneously, we're essentially trying to take several different college courses at once without having the prerequisites for any of them. But here's what makes Cayce's approach to past lives truly revolutionary. Unlike many spiritual teachers who encourage unlimited exploration of past incarnations, Cayce consistently emphasized that our current personality is our soul's masterpiece. Every limitation, every challenge, every ordinary circumstance has been specifically chosen to create optimal conditions for spiritual growth. In one of his most profound readings, 900-10, Cayce explained that the soul often incarnates with just enough past life memory to provide necessary talents and wisdom, but not so much that it becomes distracted from present opportunities. He compared it to a master teacher who gives students exactly the right amount of background information to succeed in their current studies, but not so much that they become overwhelmed or arrogant. This perspective completely transforms how we should approach spiritual development. Instead of trying to unlock impressive past life identities, Cayce taught that we should focus on fully embodying our current incarnation's potential. The qualities we're meant to develop in this lifetime will naturally draw upon relevant past life experiences without our conscious effort. Let me give you a practical example from Cayce's own family. His son Hugh Lynn Cayce had clear psychic abilities from childhood, but Edgar consistently discouraged him from developing these gifts until he had first mastered ordinary educational and social skills. Cayce knew that premature psychic development, even based on past life abilities, could create spiritual imbalance and social difficulties. Hugh Lynn later became one of the most respected psychic researchers in America, but only after he had established himself as a competent educator and administrator. This pattern reflects Cayce's deep understanding that spiritual gifts must be grounded in practical competence and emotional maturity to be truly beneficial. Now you might be asking, are there any safe ways to explore past life connections? Cayce did provide specific guidelines for those who felt genuinely called to this exploration. First, he emphasized that any past life work should be done in the context of prayer and meditation, with the specific intention of understanding how past experiences can improve current service to others. In reading 262-89, Cayce outlined what he called the constructive approach to past life exploration. This involves asking not who was I, but rather what can I learn from my soul's journey that will make me more loving, more patient, and more helpful in my current relationships and work. The Sleeping Prophet also recommended that people focus on developing their current incarnation's gifts rather than trying to recover past life abilities. He observed that souls often have to relearn abilities from previous incarnations because the current personality and circumstances require a different approach to expressing those same spiritual qualities. For instance, someone who had been a healer in ancient Egypt might need to express healing abilities as a modern nurse, therapist, or even as a parent who creates an emotionally nurturing home environment. The essential spiritual quality remains the same, but the expression must fit current circumstances and the soul's present learning needs. But here's where Cayce's teachings become really practical for modern spiritual seekers. He consistently taught that our strongest current interests and natural talents usually reflect our most constructive past life experiences. If you're naturally drawn to music, teaching, healing, or any other field, Cayce would say that interest likely comes from successful past life development in related areas. The key is to develop these natural inclinations through present-day opportunities, rather than trying to recreate ancient methods or contexts. A person with past life experience as an Atlantean crystal worker might best express that knowledge by becoming a computer programmer or electronics engineer, not by trying to channel ancient Atlantean technology. This practical approach protects us from the spiritual inflation that Cayce identified as one of the greatest dangers of past life exploration. When we ground our spiritual insights in current service and relationships, we avoid the trap of feeling special or separate from others based on our supposed past life experiences. Cayce also warned about another subtle danger that's particularly relevant in our social media age. In reading 1472-01, he described how some people become so identified with their past life personalities that they begin to perform these identities for others rather than genuinely integrating the lessons. This performance creates what he called spiritual dishonesty that actually blocks soul development. Think about how many people today collect impressive past life identities and share them as a form of spiritual status. Cayce would say this approach completely misses the point of reincarnation, which is not to accumulate interesting experiences, but to develop unconditional love and selfless service. The Sleeping Prophet had a particularly wise perspective on the very human tendency to claim famous or powerful past life identities. In reading 5749-14, he pointed out that there have been thousands of incarnations throughout history, but only a relatively small number of famous historical figures. The mathematics alone suggests that most of our past lives were probably quite ordinary. More importantly, Cayce taught that souls often choose humble incarnations, specifically to develop qualities that can't be learned in positions of power or fame. Some of our most important spiritual development might have occurred during lifetimes as simple farmers, devoted parents, or quiet craftspeople. This doesn't mean these incarnations were less valuable. In fact, Cayce consistently emphasized that souls who had learned to find joy and meaning in ordinary circumstances had often achieved greater spiritual development than those who had wielded great worldly power. Now let me share with you one final case that perfectly illustrates both the dangers and the constructive potential of past life insights. Sarah, a young woman from Virginia Beach, had been having recurring dreams about medieval monastery life. These dreams were so vivid and consistent that she became convinced she had been a monk in a previous incarnation. Instead of immediately seeking a life reading from Cayce, Sarah decided to test this insight by dedicating herself more fully to prayer and spiritual study in her current life. She increased her meditation practice, began volunteering at local charities, and focused on developing the contemplative qualities she admired in her dream memories. When she finally did receive a reading from Cayce in 1944, he confirmed that she had indeed spent several incarnations in monastic settings. But more importantly, he revealed that her current incarnation as a woman in the modern world was specifically designed to take the spiritual discipline she had developed in those cloistered lifetimes and apply it to the challenges of family relationships and worldly responsibilities. Cayce explained that Sarah's medieval incarnations had been preparation for her current role, not a spiritual peak she should try to recreate. By first proving that she could apply monastic virtues to contemporary life, she had demonstrated the maturity needed to safely access and integrate her past life experiences. This case illustrates what Cayce considered the ideal relationship between past life memory and current incarnation. The insights should enhance and enrich our present circumstances, not provide an escape from them, or make us feel that our current life is somehow inadequate. Throughout all of his readings on reincarnation, Edgar Cayce maintained that our present incarnation represents our soul's current curriculum. We can certainly draw wisdom and understanding from past experiences, but only if we remain fully committed to learning the lessons that our current circumstances are designed to teach. The Sleeping Prophet's warnings about past life memories weren't meant to discourage spiritual exploration, but to protect seekers from the subtle traps that can derail genuine spiritual development. By approaching past life insights with humility, focusing on present service, and maintaining our commitment to current relationships and responsibilities, we can safely access the wisdom of our soul's journey without falling into the spiritual pitfalls that concerned Cayce so deeply. Remember, according to Edgar Cayce's readings, the most advanced souls are often those living the most ordinary lives, with extraordinary love and dedication. Your current circumstances, however humble they might seem, represent exactly the spiritual classroom your soul has chosen for its next level of development. The real question isn't who you were in past lives, but who you're becoming through the patient, loving engagement with whatever opportunities and challenges this incarnation has provided. That's where your true spiritual power lies, and that's the path Edgar Cayce consistently pointed toward throughout his remarkable career as America's most documented and trusted psychic counselor. What if I told you that a man from Kentucky working from a small clinic in Virginia Beach, accurately predicted the stock market crash of 1929, the exact dates of both world wars, and described healing remedies that modern medicine is only now beginning to understand. Edgar Cayce, known as America's greatest psychic, gave over 14,000 documented readings between 1901 and 1944, and what he revealed about your spiritual future might completely change how you see consciousness itself. Have you ever felt like there's more to reality than what meets the eye? Like you're meant for something greater than your current circumstances? By the end of this video, you'll understand why Edgar Cayce's reading suggests that every single person watching right now is living through the most spiritually significant period in human history. I'm going to share 3 mind-blowing revelations from Cayce's documented readings. First, his specific prophecy about a global spiritual awakening happening right now in our lifetime. Second, the shocking truth about reincarnation that he revealed through thousands of life readings. And third, his detailed descriptions of Atlantis and how ancient souls are returning today with special missions. But here's what nobody talks about when discussing Edgar Cayce. This wasn't just some mysterious fortune teller working out of a carnival tent. This was a devoutly Christian man who accidentally discovered he could access what he called the Akashic records while in a self-induced trance state. The Edgar Cayce Foundation in Virginia Beach has meticulously preserved every single reading, complete with stenographer notes, follow-up reports, and documented outcomes. Let me paint you a picture of how this all began. It's 1901 in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Edgar Cayce is a 24-year-old photographer who suddenly loses his voice. Doctors can't help him. He's desperate, facing the possibility of never speaking again. A traveling hypnotist suggests putting Edgar into a trance to see if his subconscious mind can diagnose the problem. What happened next would change everything we understand about human consciousness. While in trance, Edgar began speaking in a completely different voice, describing his throat condition in perfect medical terminology he'd never studied. But wait, this gets even more incredible. The voice didn't just diagnose the problem. It prescribed a specific treatment involving increased blood circulation to the vocal cords. Edgar followed the instructions, and his voice returned completely. Word spread quickly through Kentucky and beyond. People with incurable conditions started seeking out this strange young man who could apparently access unlimited medical knowledge while unconscious. The readings were so accurate, so detailed, that medical doctors began consulting Edgar Cayce for their most difficult cases. Here's what Cayce revealed in reading 25468 that shocked even his stenographer. A woman came to him with what doctors had diagnosed as terminal stomach cancer. In trance, Cayce's voice calmly stated that she didn't have cancer at all, but rather a severe digestive condition caused by specific dietary choices and emotional stress. He prescribed a treatment involving apple cider vinegar, specific dietary changes, and regular meditation. 3 months later, she returned completely healthy. The supposed cancer had vanished. But this changes everything about how we understand consciousness and healing. Cayce wasn't just randomly guessing. In over 9,000 medical readings, he maintained an accuracy rate that astounded physicians of his era. He could describe internal conditions he'd never studied, prescribe treatments using medical terminology he'd never learned, and recommend remedies that wouldn't be discovered by conventional medicine for decades. Think about this for a moment. If one man could access this kind of unlimited information while in an altered state of consciousness, what does that tell us about the nature of reality itself? In 3 minutes, I'm going to show you the reading that made Edgar Cayce himself question everything he thought he knew about life and death. But first, let me share something that will make you rethink your entire spiritual journey. Cayce didn't just do medical readings. Starting in 1923, he began giving what he called life readings, where he would describe people's past incarnations and explain how previous lives were affecting their current circumstances. These weren't vague generalizations. These were specific, detailed accounts of historical periods, geographic locations, and life circumstances that could be verified. Consider Life Reading 2367-1, given to a young man suffering from unexplained phobias and relationship difficulties. While in trance, Cayce described this man's previous incarnation as a Roman soldier who had participated in the persecution of early Christians. The reading explained that his current fears and guilt stemmed from karmic memory of those actions and provided specific guidance for healing these ancient wounds through service to others and meditation practices. The man followed Cayce's suggestions and within a year reported that his phobias had completely disappeared and his relationships had transformed. But wait, here's where this gets absolutely mind-blowing. Cayce gave similar readings to thousands of people, and patterns began emerging that revealed something extraordinary about human consciousness and reincarnation. He consistently described souls reincarnating in groups, working out karma together across multiple lifetimes. He explained how talents, fears, relationships, and even physical conditions often stemmed from experiences in previous incarnations. This wasn't just abstract philosophy. These readings provided practical guidance that people could use to understand and transform their current life circumstances. Now you might be thinking, how could a simple photographer from Kentucky access this kind of information? Cayce himself struggled with this question his entire life. He was a devout Christian who taught Sunday school and initially worried that his psychic abilities might be inconsistent with his faith. Here's what changed his perspective forever. In Reading 254-87, someone asked Cayce directly about the source of his information. The sleeping prophet, as he came to be known, explained that he was accessing what he called the Akashic records, described as a cosmic library containing the complete history of every soul's journey through time. Think of it like a universal database of consciousness, where every thought, action, and experience is permanently recorded. But this revelation opened up an even more incredible possibility. If Edgar Cayce could access these records, what about other people? What about you? Cayce consistently taught that psychic abilities weren't unique gifts given to special individuals. Instead, he explained that every person has the potential to develop intuitive abilities and access higher levels of consciousness. The difference is simply a matter of spiritual development and attunement. In just a moment, I'm going to reveal Cayce's most shocking prophecy about spiritual awakening in our current time period. But first, let me share a story that demonstrates the incredible accuracy of his predictions. It's 1925, and America is experiencing unprecedented economic prosperity. The stock market is soaring, and most financial experts are predicting continued growth. But in Reading 195-54, Edgar Cayce saw something completely different. He predicted a severe economic collapse that would begin in late 1929 and continue for several years. The reading was so specific that it warned against speculation in stocks and recommended investing in conservative securities instead. People who followed this guidance avoided the devastating losses of the Great Depression. But Cayce's prophecies went far beyond economic predictions. In the 1930s and early 1940s, he accurately predicted the beginning and end dates of World War II, described the alliance between America and Russia against Germany, and even predicted the development of atomic weapons. Here's what makes these prophecies absolutely incredible. Cayce wasn't making educated guesses based on current events. He was accessing information about future possibilities and probabilities through the same source that provided his medical and life readings. But wait, there's something even more extraordinary about Cayce's predictions. Starting in the 1930s, his readings began describing a coming period of global spiritual awakening that would begin in the late 20th century and accelerate dramatically in the early 21st century. Does this time frame sound familiar? In reading 16023, given in 1939, Cayce described a time when the Earth and its peoples would experience a new understanding of spiritual principles. He predicted that ancient wisdom would be rediscovered, that healing methods combining physical and spiritual approaches would become mainstream, and that people around the world would begin developing psychic and intuitive abilities. Think about what's happened in America and around the world since the 1960s. The explosion of interest in meditation, alternative healing methods, past life regression, energy work, and spiritual consciousness. The integration of Eastern spiritual practices with Western psychology and medicine. The growing acceptance of intuitive and psychic phenomena. Cayce saw all of this coming decades before it began manifesting. But here's the part that will absolutely shock you about what's happening right now. In reading 1152-11, Cayce described this current period as a time when Atlantean souls would return to Earth in large numbers. Now, before you dismiss this as fantasy, let me explain what his readings revealed about Atlantis and why this matters for your spiritual journey today. Through hundreds of readings, Cayce described Atlantis not as a mythical civilization, but as an actual advanced society that existed for thousands of years before being destroyed by catastrophic earth changes around 10,000 BC. But here's what makes this relevant to you personally. According to Cayce's readings, many souls who lived during the final period of Atlantis are reincarnating now, drawn back to Earth during this time of technological advancement and spiritual awakening. These souls carry both incredible creative potential and deep karmic responsibility for learning to use power and technology wisely. Does this resonate with you? Do you feel drawn to advanced technology, healing methods, or spiritual practices? Do you sometimes feel like you don't quite belong in this time period, or like you're here for some special purpose you can't quite identify? Cayce suggested that many people experiencing these feelings might be Atlantean souls returning to help humanity navigate the same challenges that once destroyed their previous civilization. But this brings us to the most important prophecy Edgar Cayce ever gave about our current time period. In reading 378-16, given in 1933, Cayce described the years between 1998 and 2025 as a critical transition period for human consciousness. He predicted that during this time, humanity would face a choice between spiritual evolution and self-destruction. The outcome would depend on whether enough individuals chose to develop their spiritual nature and work for the good of all humanity. Look around you right now. Consider the challenges facing our world. Climate change, political divisions, technological advancement outpacing wisdom, and growing inequality. At the same time, notice the unprecedented interest in spiritual development, consciousness exploration, alternative healing, and holistic approaches to life's problems. We're living exactly in the time period Cayce described as humanity's great spiritual test. But here's the incredible hope embedded in his prophecies. Cayce consistently taught that this transition period, challenging as it might be, would ultimately lead to a new age of spiritual understanding and human cooperation. He described a coming time when healing would integrate physical, mental, and spiritual approaches, when people would routinely use intuitive abilities to solve problems, and when humanity would learn to live in harmony with both technology and nature. The question is, what role are you meant to play in this spiritual awakening? This is where Cayce's teachings become intensely practical for your life right now. In thousands of readings, he provided specific guidance for spiritual development that anyone can follow. He consistently recommended daily meditation, regular prayer, selfless service to others, and study of spiritual principles as the foundation for developing psychic abilities and higher consciousness. But wait, there's a specific practice Cayce recommended that most people have never heard about. In reading 281-13, he described a technique for accessing your own Akashic records through what he called attunement meditation. This involves entering a meditative state while holding the specific intention to receive guidance about your soul's purpose and past life influences affecting your current circumstances. Cayce taught that every person could learn to access the same source of information he used in his readings. The difference is simply a matter of spiritual preparation, sincere motivation, and consistent practice. Here's a documented case that demonstrates how powerful this can be. A businessman from New York received a life reading from Cayce in 1928 that described his soul's mission to develop healing centers, combining medical treatment with spiritual counseling. The reading provided specific guidance about location, methods, and even potential partners for this work. Initially skeptical, the man gradually began following the guidance. Within 5 years, he had established 3 successful healing centers that integrated medical treatment with meditation, prayer, and counseling. These centers helped thousands of people and became models for the holistic health movement that would later spread across America. But this changes everything about how we understand individual purpose and spiritual mission. Cayce's readings consistently taught that every soul incarnates with specific talents, purposes, and opportunities for growth. Your current life circumstances, relationships, challenges, and opportunities aren't random events. They're precisely arranged learning experiences designed to help your soul evolve toward greater love, wisdom, and service. Think about your own life for a moment. What recurring themes do you notice? What talents come naturally to you? What causes or types of people do you feel drawn to help? What challenges keep appearing that force you to develop specific qualities or skills? According to Cayce's teachings, these patterns provide clues about your soul's intended purpose in this lifetime. But here's what nobody talks about regarding Edgar Cayce's most profound legacy. Beyond the medical readings, life readings, and prophecies, Cayce provided humanity with a complete framework for understanding consciousness, reincarnation, and spiritual evolution that bridges the gap between religious faith and scientific inquiry. His readings describe a universe that's fundamentally spiritual in nature, where consciousness is the primary reality, and physical matter is simply one expression of universal creative force. This worldview offers practical answers to humanity's deepest questions. Why do we suffer? What happens after death? What's the purpose of life? How can we develop our spiritual potential? How should we treat others? What's our responsibility to the planet and future generations? Cayce's answers to these questions weren't abstract philosophy. They were practical guidance based on direct access to what he called the universal consciousness, or the Christ consciousness. And here's the most incredible part of his entire body of work. In Reading 262-87, Cayce explained that the information he accessed wasn't limited to him personally. He described the Akashic records as being available to anyone who approaches them with pure motivation and sufficient spiritual preparation. He taught that developing psychic abilities and accessing higher guidance isn't about becoming special or different from other people. It's about becoming more fully human, more completely yourself. This is why Edgar Cayce's work remains so relevant today. He provided proof that human consciousness extends far beyond the physical brain, that we're all connected to unlimited sources of wisdom and healing, and that every person has the potential to develop extraordinary abilities for helping themselves and others. But there's one final revelation from Cayce's readings that ties everything together. In his final years, Edgar Cayce's readings began emphasizing that the most important psychic ability anyone can develop isn't predicting the future or diagnosing illness. The most important ability is learning to consistently express love, compassion, and service in daily life. Reading 254-109 states it clearly. The greatest psychic ability is to be able to love your fellow man. This wasn't just spiritual sentiment. Cayce taught that love is literally the creative force of the universe, and that developing our capacity to love others is the ultimate purpose of all spiritual evolution. Think about the implications of this teaching for your life right now. Every interaction you have, every choice you make, every challenge you face is an opportunity to express more love, develop greater wisdom, or provide more genuine service to others. According to Edgar Cayce's readings, this is why you're here during this critical time in human history. Not to be perfect, not to have special powers, but to contribute your unique gifts toward humanity's spiritual awakening through practical expressions of love and service. The sleeping prophet left us more than 14,000 documented readings, but his most important message can be summarized in a single sentence. You are a spiritual being having a human experience, and your purpose is to awaken to your divine nature while helping others do the same. As we face the challenges and opportunities of our current time, Edgar Cayce's work reminds us that we're not victims of circumstance or powerless observers of world events. We're spiritual beings with unlimited potential for growth, healing, and positive contribution to human consciousness. The future Edgar Cayce saw in 1944 is unfolding right now, and you're not just witnessing it, you're actively participating in humanity's greatest spiritual adventure. The question isn't whether you have psychic abilities or special gifts. The question is, how will you use the consciousness, love, and wisdom you already possess to help create the better world that Edgar Cayce knew was possible? Every documented reading, every verified prophecy, every miraculous healing in Edgar Cayce's legacy points to the same truth. Consciousness is unlimited. Love is the creative force of existence, and every person alive today has the potential to access wisdom and abilities that can transform both their personal life and contribute to humanity's spiritual evolution. The sleeping prophet awakened us to possibilities we're still discovering. Now it's time for each of us to awaken to our own unlimited potential for love, service, and spiritual growth. The future he saw depends on the choices we make today.